All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to unpack a really fascinating text, one that covers 1,000 years of history, war, and faith for ancient civilizations that are said to have lived in the Americas.
So just imagine that for a second. We're not talking about just a few fragments or some ruins. Think about a detailed account of their prophets, their kings, their biggest failures, and their greatest moments of redemption, all put together in one single epic book. That's the premise we're exploring.
Okay, so let's get into it. To really understand the story, we've got to start with what the book itself says it is. And right in the introduction, it lays out its identity and its whole mission.
So, the book presents itself as a historical document. It's a record that was condensed by a prophet historian named Mormon. He took centuries of writings from two major civilizations in the ancient Americas and abridged them onto metal plates, all to preserve their story for a future generation.
This right here is so important because it explicitly states its purpose, and it's really a two-part mission. First, it's meant to be a historical record for the descendants of these people. And second, it's a religious witness for, well, pretty much everyone, with a core goal of convincing the world that Jesus is the Christ.
So, how does a 1,000-year epic like this even begin? Well, like a lot of great stories, it doesn't start with massive armies or anything like that. It starts with just a single family and a really dramatic escape from their home.
The whole story kicks off with a prophet named Lehi. He gets a warning from God to flee Jerusalem right before it's destroyed. So he takes his family out into the wilderness. He even sends his sons back on this super dangerous mission to get their scriptures, which were on brass plates. And after years of traveling, they actually build a ship and cross the ocean to the Americas. But that journey, it creates a huge split in the family. A really bitter rivalry between two of the brothers, Nephi and Laman, divides them into two opposing nations. You have the Nephites and the Lamanites. And this one conflict, right at the beginning, basically sets the stage for almost all of the struggles and wars for the next 1,000 years.
And this brings us to one of the book's central themes, a pattern that just keeps repeating. As you follow the history of these two nations, you start to see this predictable cycle pop up, and it's tied directly to their choices.
It's this powerful rhythm that you see over and over. When the people are living by the religious principles, they have peace, they prosper. But what happens with prosperity? It often leads to pride, and then division. And that spiritual slide leads right into conflict, war, and total societal collapse, until, finally, a humbled group is ready to start that cycle all over again. Now, let's see how this all builds up, because after centuries of these cycles, of all the prophecies and wars, the entire story is pointing toward one single massive event that really serves as the book's spiritual center.
Yep, the theological heart of the Book of Mormon is this account of Jesus Christ appearing in the ancient Americas, right after his resurrection in Jerusalem. For the people in this story, this is everything they've been waiting for, the fulfillment of generations of prophecy.
And during this visit, Christ sets up his church. He calls disciples, and he delivers a sermon that sounds a lot like the Sermon on the Mount, teaching about faith, repentance, and baptism. And his visit kicks off a golden age. We're talking 200 years where everyone lived in total peace and unity.
So, if we look past the epic history and that incredible climax, what are the core practical ideas the book is trying to leave with us? Let's break down a few of the big ones.
First up is just how much value is placed on history, on keeping records. The book makes this argument again and again. When a society forgets its past, when they forget how God has dealt with their ancestors, they lose their way and dwindle in unbelief. Next, faith is never shown as just a passive belief. It's an action word. It's the engine that makes people do things, often against impossible odds, whether that's figuring out how to build a ship to cross an ocean or standing up to a massive army. And finally, this idea of personal choice and accountability is woven through the entire record. The book's message is that people are free to act for themselves, to choose their own path, but they are not free to choose the consequences that come with those actions. Good choices lead to good results, and bad choices, well, they eventually lead to ruin. So let's do a quick recap of this huge record. It kicks off with a family's exodus. It covers 1,000 years of their history, showing that repeating cycle of righteousness and wickedness. The whole narrative builds to a climax with a visit from Jesus Christ, and in the end, it leaves us with these powerful principles about history, active faith, and personal accountability. And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. What kind of power do these ancient texts, these windows into the past, still have today? How do the stories we tell about where we came from continue to define who we are? And maybe more importantly, where we're going?